China is officially declaring war on foreign garbage. The Chinese authorities have decided to ban 24 categories of imported garbage by the end of 2017. For years, China has benefited from recyclable plastic imports due to energy production and the boom of low-value-added manufacturing. But such disposals of overseas waste have proved detrimental to our environment and health. Meanwhile, piecemeal efforts to encourage recycling and waste sorting were far outstripped by rising consumption by China's expanding middle class over the past decade, which has seen China grow to become the world's biggest garbage generator by weight. What are the implications of China's ban on foreign garbage, and how would effective sorting help the country to turn trash into treasure? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the Beijing studio by Madam Wu Changhua, former Greater China Director of the Climate Group, and Diana Perusheva-Lowry, independent consultant from International Energy and Environmental Affairs. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui.
For many years, China has been the largest global importer of recyclable foreign garbage made up of solid waste such as plastic, textiles and mixed paper. Last year, 7.3 million metric tons of waste plastics were imported by Chinese manufacturers from countries including the UK, the US and Japan. During the past few decades, the rapidly growing economy of China has caused huge demand for raw materials in the process of development. Imports of rubbish have helped to feed China's appetite. However, these imports are often dirty, poorly sorted, contaminated with hazardous substances or recycled improperly, causing many environmental problems. The Chinese government has tried to block imports of illegal and low-quality waste officially at customs, but it was still smuggled into the country by those seeking exorbitant trade profits. China has notified the World Trade Organization that by the end of this year it will no longer accept imports of 24 categories of recyclables and solid waste as part of a government campaign against foreign garbage. The ban is not only to protect the environment and improve public health, but also to promote industrial transformation and upgrading. The ban has caused great concern among countries that have heavily relied on the China market to solve their waste and recycling problems. But there is also a growing voice from those countries that it's time to find new and more efficient solutions to solve their own waste problems. In China, sorting and proper recycling is urgently needed for the country's own waste. As early as the year 2000, Beijing, Shanghai and several other cities became the first pilot areas to promote garbage sorting, but the results continue to be far from satisfactory.
Welcome to Dialogue. What do you think is the message that the Chinese government delivers when it declares 24 categories of recyclables and solid waste to be banned by the end of this year?
It's a great step forward from Chinese government side. China signed up to the Basel Convention to control the transboundary movement of hazardous waste, solid waste, and their disposal back in 1990. The convention became effective in 1992. So since then, the international community has been making efforts to ban, to literally control the transboundary movement of solid waste. And so China, as a signatory country to the convention, definitely has been delivering its commitment. But in the meantime, I think from the impact perspective, I think the enforcement is not adequate yet. So by announcing, determining further actions to prevent the 24 specific categories, I think that's a huge step forward to demonstrating China's willingness and leadership for global environmental governance, and also hoping that's going to drive more transformation domestically.
There's no question about the political will of the new generation of Chinese leadership about keeping and protecting the ecological balance with the rapid expansion of China's modernization, particularly industrialization. Having said this, Diana, can you brief us on the immediate response from European countries about China's decision to ban 24 categories of plastic and industrial waste?
Well, I think it's a mixed response, as one can expect from a policy like this. Overall, it's a policy, as you already announced, which is in an area where the whole world is expecting China to do more, and China is demonstrating they're ready and willing to do more. Hence, all these environmental protection policies that are now strongly enhanced. On the other hand, some would say that this is a trade barrier which is enforced relatively abrupt. I mean, there are relatively little time given to foreign companies to prepare for this policy. So I think the question will be asked to how this policy will be executed, whether it will lead to, as some on the West predict, to higher commodity prices, more use of, for example, timber or oil to substitute for secondary materials coming from this recyclable material, or whether this will actually help Chinese internal recycling rates to increase and the industry to actually step to a different level where all these environmental concerns will be addressed and will be properly dealt with.
I'm afraid pollution is a global problem. And globalization itself is characterized by not only free flow of products, capital, services, human resources, but also plastic garbage and industrial waste. So do you think that a solution in China would be a problem for other developing countries which are likely to become dumping sites for Western industrial waste?
Well, it's unfortunately very likely, and not only other developing countries that might pick up this waste and deal with it in an appropriate way, whereas China is now much more developed, not only economically, but also in the way that China is thinking about environmental problems. Other countries which are now on the path of development might not be so advanced, so they might just repeat the mistakes that China did. So I would hope that this will actually trigger more international action, how we deal collectively with waste, so that waste is not treated in the way that we've seen treated in China, and also we don't see actually decrease in recycling around the world, which is one of the kind of concerns of a lot of international environmental organizations that think that if there's no way or no place where this recyclable material can go to be processed, then the rest of the world or the West might only recycle less or decrease the recycling rate. So there are a lot of unknowns as to what this policy will lead us to.
Can I just add on that, actually? I do understand Diana's point that, because China made this announcement this year, and for the normal trade routes that, the transboundary movement of garbage that has been going on, there are many players involved. There could be shock, whatever. But really put in the context, come on, we have an international convention. We signed, more than 100 countries signed up to it back in the early 1990s. And we have an obligation globally. We have consensus globally that we should honor, right? If you look at the details, there was an amendment in 1995 that started to include like plastics, used paper, whatever. It's very specific on paper, and more than 100 countries signed up to it, meaning we need to honor the commitment to the international multilateral sort of commitment there. The implementation part has proven to be very challenging, as we were talking about here today. We're still surrounded by garbage. If you look at the transboundary movement, there's still a lot of trade of garbage. So even though actually we have the international convention, but we're not really doing that, and that's generating more hazardous sort of impact on human health and the environment there. So this is urgent in a way. It doesn't matter. There are always interested parties or whatever who will be suffering or losers in this process. But we need to look at the winners, and the countries, the environment, the people will win from that process. And the international community has to figure out to address that.
Regarding the issue of implementation or execution of international commitments globally, perhaps there's the issue of evolution of public awareness concerning garbage disposal over the past decade, since we opened ourselves up in the late 1970s. Why there's such an allegation that trash, if placed in the right place and handled properly, would be treasure? And do you think this has been the guiding principle for the general, some of the non-government and private companies to have imported so much overseas garbage? Changhua?
Yes, I think from science perspective, yes. The way we call like a garbage, we put it like a resource, put in the wrong place or in the wrong hands. That's why they become waste. But then if you look at ecological environment and natural resources constraints, we cannot just go to, we just extract minerals or resources from nature, we just process that, turn them into something useful, valuable, and then at the end of their life, turn them into waste and dump them back into the nature. But rather, technology today available give us the tools, the capabilities to say, okay, we could recycle, reuse. Of course, we need to reduce the use in the beginning. So this closed loop concept has been out there for a long time. If you look at Europe, many European countries have been leading on the circular economy, closed loop. Look at a few DSM in the Dutch, and there are a few other companies around the world. If you look at Dow Chemicals from the US, they're all integrating that into their business model. Not necessarily totally for the sake of the environment, but really because it's resources, right? If it's resources and it's cost effective, companies are already doing that. So it's not like a tomorrow's solution, tomorrow's technology. It's already here. It's really the political will, the coming together, the awareness, the determination, and the business government coming together to make it happen, scale up.
I'm sorry to ask, is it an issue of political will or public awareness?
I think
or
both.
Education? Yes, it's both. But let me go back to the ugly fact. Last year alone, Chinese manufacturers imported 7.3 million metric tons of waste plastics from developed countries, including the UK, the EU, the United States, and Japan. So how many years are we behind industrial nations in terms of the green awareness, and particularly in the area of garbage sorting?
Well, I cannot give you exact answer on this question, of course. I don't know exactly how many years, but I know that Europe and the West have spent decades and millions for public awareness programs. So this is not something that just comes. In Japan, for example, that you keep coming rightly back to as a good example, they have this in textbooks, they have this at school, so it's a long
it's a long
process.
Education,
Absolutely.
Common sense.
Absolutely. It's a behavior. Everyone has to behave that way.
Behavior
it's a
change
norm.
is the most difficult one to change. So yeah.
It's a sense of guilt if you fail to do garbage sorting. In fact, housewives spend hours doing garbage sorting in Japan. I mean, it seems to be mission impossible for us to learn.
To be fair, take the good examples, Japan and Germany, into the picture. It's not like when the government made a decision regulation today, tomorrow everyone started to do that. If you look at the journey, it also took them a while to pull everyone together. But what we are seeing today is already built into the norm. I wouldn't use just a guilt, responsibility, but it's also opportunity. It's a resources, right? If we look at the environmental constraints, we do not have much resource out there for us to dig, to cut, whatever. We have to use whatever we have as much as possible. So this closed loop circular economy has to be a major part of the solution.
Chinese authorities tend to end up using punitive measures, taking punitive measures instead of nice education or financial incentives. That's part of the market. So do you think, such as the carbon trade, we can turn to the marketing means or approaches instead?
The answer is yes. It's not absolutely yes or absolutely no, because for any policy instruments to play their role, you need to put them in a enabling context there. So we're talking about the environment, the ecosystem, the nature. It's a public goods. We cannot possibly leave everything to the market to solve the public goods challenges there. So government laws, regulations, policy incentives have to be a very crucial part of the picture to enable the context so the market will make sense. So this is not an absolute say either just the government does it everything or the market does it everything, but rather it has the government, the market, and of course the society coming together. That has to be the case.
Thank you so much, Changhua, for your very insightful articulation of the therapy and policy instruments. And thank you, Diana, for your briefing the Chinese audience, is an international one, on how Europeans and Japanese in our neighborhood have done to protect the environment. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back after the short break. Stay with us, please. We've heard many stories about the street protests against the construction of chemical plants which might deliver dioxins through incineration of the garbage. That's a very common disposal of the industrial waste. What do you think of the fundamental driving force behind the local governments in building such plants, and how do you assess such risks in the future?
For local decision makers, it's very obvious. It's economic sense. When you build the facilities in the city, in the region, you have more tax, right? And the government lives on taxations, and it supposedly creates a certain number of jobs, whatever. So it's really for the economic sense. It's so simple. But the thing is, this not in my backyard syndrome, and which we witnessed in western part of the world, we started to witness more and more in China, meaning the society is waking up and everyone cares about the environment, about the environmental impact on their health, and no one would like to have a sort of a time bomb actually in the neighborhood because we've seen enough.
Do you think the abusive use of social media may have amplified the threats posed by the incineration of garbage? I mean, some of them some of the netizens may have used the rumors to drive or relocate such chemical plants to the dismay of the local governments, which took the local GDP growth as the top priority.
I do not have statistics, so I cannot really say definitely yes, but observation, yes, factors like that probably exist. But there's the other side. If you look around, if you look at Nordic countries, it's not, no one has this waste-to-energy incinerators or the power plants at all, suddenly just in China. But rather, from technology perspective, you could literally deliver zero emissions. Meaning you could gather the waste, turn the waste into energy without really causing any negative impact at the local level by emitting, pollutants there. So the issue is complicated. Complicated in a way, yes, the social mindset is there, but in the meantime, there are cases in reality, basically you build up, you assume actually there should be no pollution, whatever, but in reality, monitoring data tells you there is. So mix the things together, that makes the things more complicated in reality. I have nothing against waste to energy, but in reality, it has to make sure it has to be zero emissions. Otherwise, that doesn't make any sense.
Diana, how harmful is dioxins? Is it one of the fundamental reasons for causing cancers? Because that will generate a panic among the locals who would definitely go against any idea of building the chemical plants, or I mean incineration.
Well, to be honest with you, I don't know what the health organizations would say on these particular emissions, but any emissions are to an extent harmful for human health. I would just get back to your point. I think the point is not whether the technology exists and whether they can be safe for humans, whether this technology is applied actually properly. And I think there is a level of mistrust between what Chinese people hear they will get and what they get at the end. And that's where I think is the breaking point. Otherwise, as you pointed, this technology exists and can be employed.
So what are the differences between landfills and incineration? Why it seems in most cases local governments in China would bury up the garbage instead of burning the trash in a clean way?
First, we do not have enough land space to just bury garbage anymore. If you look at the existing landfills, and they're contaminating groundwater, causing a lot of local environmental damages there. In return, also actually they harm local people's health there as well. So there's barely anything good about it at this moment. So the ecological environmental constraints basically say no more landfills. That's why actually you start to see more and more transboundary movements of those garbage, trash from other developed countries to China. Why? Because laws, regulations in those countries basically say zero landfill, and the garbage has nowhere to go. And either they figure out, it's very expensive technology to figure out the solutions, or a cheaper way is to ship them to other countries like China and other developing countries. And on the receiving side, we could turn that into some sort of a cheap resources, whatever. So that's the sort of vicious cycle we've been witnessing, living in over, today. But as I said, actually, China today, with the rapid population growth there as well, we also face a very similar challenge. So I think say no to landfill is becoming pretty much a big part of this ecological civilization. If we're serious about the ecological boundary, we have to respect to build that into the society to achieve the balance between nature and the human development, and that has to be part of the solution.
Majority of the Chinese believe firmly that China is way behind the industrial nations in recycling the wastes. Does that mean automatically that there's a zero tolerance for landfills in European countries, for example?
Well, there is no zero tolerance for landfills. Every country makes decisions based on their resources and their problems. Also, every city would make a decision based on their resources and their problems. So I think usually there's no silver bullet. You always have to put a mixture of policies and mixture of actions to achieve something. So, for example, Eastern Europe has a lot of landfills, and there is a big debate in Europe of whether this should be tolerated and to what extent it should or should not. But it's not that Europe will ever get rid of all the landfills. So I think as far as you treat anything reasonably, and I think that the answer is we have to recycle more and we have to try to use less. Otherwise, we'll just
vicious cycle. Just keep going. You have to start from the beginning. I think, so back to the reality, I think to complement the European Union's sort of leadership, a lot of countries' leadership in terms of 3 Rs or 5 Rs, depending on how you define them, I think the concept is already there. We know very well today we need to use less. So you have to start from the beginning through technology innovation, designing, redesigning, whatever, to make sure if we know by the end of the lifespan of this product will end up in landfill, we have to redesign and rethink about it. So we need to reduce in the beginning. Of course, we cannot possibly get down to zero in the end. And then how do we make sure using laws, regulations, and also incentives for circular economy, closed loop, and probably at the very end of it, the life cycle of certain waste, whatever, they probably would end up somewhere. But I think the level of ambition of the world community today is trying to get that done, if not totally zero, but to near zero. I think that's the right direction to pursue.
There's already a sharp decrease in the use of plastics because of the pervasive use of smartphones, advanced production of electronic goods and household appliances. Now, the advanced technology in the age of digital technology means that we are less reliant or dependent on paper or plastic bags. However, despite the comprehensive ban imposed by the Chinese government on the use of plastic bags, they still exist. I mean, look at the supermarket. Despite the financial disincentives, people still buy plastics and take home the goods from the supermarket. So what do you think of this idea that we would use less of the plastic?
Well, we could use less of a plastic. I mean, around the world there are a lot of policies and a lot of campaign about reducing plastic, and I can tell you a lot of people in Europe do take their bags from home and shop this way. I mean, it's a question, not everybody does it, probably no, we're not going to reach a point where everybody will do it, but little by little things are going in the right direction. So I think the incentives are right. I think, as I said, it's going to take a while until the public is fully supportive and implementing these policies, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try, because there's no one way.
Well, e-commerce and online payment become two major innovations in China. However, the side effects are equally appalling. For example, explosive growth in e-commerce saw 31 billion parcels delivered in China last year, 44% of the global total. The amount of electronic hardware waste, such as mobile phones and laptops that China generates, also doubled in the last 5 years to 6.7 million tons. Therefore, do you think the rise of e-commerce means the use of more plastic bags in the delivery?
It's a fortunate reality today, but it doesn't have to be that way. The reason why it has become a reality because we didn't really put enough attention to that. We didn't to set things correct, or the framework, the norm correctly in the beginning. That's why we are where we are today. But it's never too late. If you look at the trend already, packaging materials revolution is already happening. Their technology is basically totally substitute the plastics. That's already happening. Mm-hmm. If you look at Alibaba and some large players in China market and the e-commerce started to join hands actually to drive that solution. Of course, we cannot turn that overnight to 100%. We continue to have to use, cardboards and also plastics, but we have to figure out how to reduce the amount of usage as much as possible. So, the design in particular, I think design becomes a very important tool instrument to deliver that as well. So things are already happening. And so hopefully somehow today, because the awareness is here and the willingness on the government side and the society is there, hopefully things will come together. As I said, incentives, technology innovation, financial model, behavior change, and the companies, large companies together to take on the responsibility to deliver that. By saying that, I want to add another element, which is another driver for change today. Where did all the plastics end up? Many of them end up actually in the oceans, right? And somehow, intentionally or not intentionally, we just dump things and they flow into the ocean. So if you look at the damage today, to the ocean itself, to the biodiversity in the ocean, it's horrible. And a lot of the fiber of the plastic fiber are getting into the food chain, getting into the human body there as well. So they are where the knowledge information now exists, which is fascinating. The technologies, if you look at artificial intelligence, traceability, satellite, whatever, so now we have the technology capability to trace that, to manage that, and we know instantly where the plastic bag coming from, whatever. So if you put the e-commerce plastic waste into the bigger context there, so they do not have much space to go anymore. And hopefully that's the ecosystem we are creating, not only from China, but also globally, to really drive through the solution, and that has to happen as soon as possible.
Thank you so much, Chenghua and Diana, for briefing us on some of the detriment we have committed to not only our own habitat and environment, but the seafood in the vast oceans. Solution or protection of our environment might be crimes against innocent sea lives in other parts of the world. So we face the multiple challenges in today's world, where growing public awareness for maintaining ecological system would always capture headlines. I thank you very much for being with us. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.